Good morning, this is Angie with Wicked Handy, and today we're going to be building a simple, quick, and inexpensive trellis for our fall garden. We're going to take away some learnings from the spring trellis that we tried, make a couple improvements, and get going with our fall planting. So for this project, it is super inexpensive, and you can find the materials at any of your big box stores like Home Depot, Lowe's, even some of your smaller stores like, a tractor store, Ace Hardware, any of those. So the main components of our trellis is going to be PVC piping. I like using the 3/4 inch. I feel like it's sturdy enough and it doesn't warp as much. You could really use anything as supports. I have some leftover cedar from our garden bed project that I was thinking about using, but I like this because you can take it apart easily. So next year, if in this bed for the spring I want to plant a 3 sisters, I don't need the trellis. I can easily just take it out, collapse it, and save it for next time. The next component is wire. I got a big roll of this. It was 50 feet by 2 feet, $13 at Walmart, so that was exciting. But I wanted larger holes in the wire, so that was important to me. So that is that. Obviously wire cutters to cut the wire, and then zip ties to hold the wire onto the PVC piping. So super simple, easy stuff, nothing complicated to have to find, and you can reuse these, year after year. So a couple takeaways real quick from the spring garden, and if you're interested in seeing what that looked like for the trellis, I have it on our website at wickedhandy.net. It's also on our Pinterest account, Instagram account, YouTube. So if you just look it up, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So first takeaway, the wire I used. So I had bought this several years ago and had it sitting around in my garage because I had a vole problem when I first started gardening. So I had this as the first layer in my raised bed so they couldn't come up underneath and eat all my plants. So me not wanting to be wasteful, I attempted to use this, and it worked out okay. Our trellis ended up getting a little over 63 pounds of vegetable, and I think it probably would have been a lot more than that, but the heat took over really quick, so I had to pull the cucumber plants about a month earlier than I wanted because they just turned really bitter. We had some damage to our squash plant with a big hailstorm. So I was happy with the results because the trellis was 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep. So I'm happy with the poundage we got. However, this caused a couple of problems for me. First off, the plants were trying to grow in between. I had quite a few cucumbers that half would be on one side, half would be on the other. Same thing with leaves, they'd get stuck in here. I was finding at the top of the trellis where it was bending, because it couldn't weave in and out of this as easily as I thought it could. It was kind of stopping at one point and not moving forward, which wouldn't have been a huge problem, but with the trellis being 6 feet tall and me being 5 feet tall, even with a ladder, I was having trouble reaching the middle to try to prune, harvest, so I was just getting a lot of foliage just collecting that I couldn't get to. And as you know, green beans, if you just let the beans sit on the plant, it stops being as productive. So that kind of put a damper on everything. I thought it would just kind of grow nicely to the other side, which did not happen. So that was a big takeaway, the accessibility on the top to be able to harvest and prune, which also, if the wire had been, larger holes, a lot of the plants could have come underneath, like the green beans could have hung that, and I could have easily just walked under it and harvested. The other problem that I had was I had the trellis spanning from this first bed to the second bed, creating an arch in between. So the problem with that, even though I watched the sun before I built it, is the sun is more angled this way. So even though it comes across throughout the day, it was creating too much shade in this bed. So I had planted a row of pepper plants. They didn't get enough sun, so I had to transplant them to other pots in the middle of the summer, which really hurt their productivity. And then all the plants on this side of the trellis that were growing weren't getting as much sun because the other side was so heavily populated, sun wasn't coming through, and I was really banking on the overhead sun being able to help alleviate that, and it didn't work out as much. So what I'm planning on doing this year is creating a trellis just in this bed dedicated to green beans, and then underneath, with the shade it creates, I'm going to grow, you know, my lettuces and some other less heat tolerant, less sun needing plants that I was having trouble getting burned over the summer, like my mesclun mix. It was just too hot, it was wilting, and a lot of my other lettuces just started bolting really fast. So I'm trying to fix that for the fall because I love my homegrown salad mixes. So to get started, the first thing I did, and keep in mind this is all dependent on the size of your garden, what you're growing. Like I said, I'm planning on doing green beans with this trellis, so I'm going to give it a decent amount of height so it can grow up and over, give it plenty of room to run. If I was doing squash, I would probably do it a little bit lower, since the squash would be so heavy. The other thing is the bed I'm working on is 6 feet by 2 feet, so that kind of impacted my measurements. So just do whatever works for you if you like this idea and you want to take over. So the first thing I did is I cut down my PVC pipe. So I cut, for my corner pieces that are going to be supporting everything, I cut a little angle into it, about 45 degrees. So I did this because I was having trouble in the spring. No matter how much I hammered, I just didn't feel like it was going in deep enough. And I had a lot of problems. I had to use a lot of different supports because it just kept coming apart whenever we had a big windstorm, and it wasn't as sturdy as I wanted. So I'm adding a couple more supports into the actual structure this time to see if that helps. And I think having the stronger wire is also going to help. It's going to be a much sturdier base. You could use PVC glue. They make specialty glue for plumbers, so it doesn't come apart when you're using it for irrigation and whatnot. I am choosing not to do that because I like experimenting with my garden every season. I like trying new trellises, new beds, you know, that's half the fun for me, is experimenting. So I don't want something permanent that if I want to get rid of it, it's going to go in the dumpster. I like things that I can reuse over and over and over. So let's get started. So all I'm going to do is this pipe. I have this attachment. So what this is going to look like is I'm going to hammer this into the ground and then this on top. The point of that, I know it seems kind of silly, you could just have a single thing, but my bed kept breaking apart whenever there was a big windstorm once it was heavy with plants, because you know the wind couldn't go through as easily, so it was just pushing the whole structure. So that's why I'm adding this, so I can have a support beam across, so each side has 2 support beams. I'm hoping that alleviates my problem. And as always, I'll have a post up on my website for this project, so I'll update throughout the season how it's going, things I wish I had changed, you know, improvements for next time, because as we all know, gardening is just a project of learning that we all love, right? All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put all these spikes in the ground, and then I'll be back. So these pieces here are 4 feet. These pieces are 2 feet. So I'm just going to add them to the top here, and that is going to end up being the top of our trellis. So these are the pieces I bought to connect the sides here, and then it's going to be the middle support piece, and then this is what I bought to connect the top. So this is what the frame looks like up close, completed. And as you can tell, it's nothing crazy, it's nothing fancy. I just needed to grow plants and do it as cost effectively as possible. So a couple notes about, you know, why I constructed it this way. Like I said, I'm doing green beans, so I wanted it to be tall. So this ends up being about 5 feet tall because I buried about a foot into the soil, so it'd be nice and sturdy. I've added this support and the top support. I'm hoping that helps because I kept having these sides in the spring break loose. So I'm hoping that helps, along with the stability that the wire will hold. And then I also planted, this is about 6 inches in, because I'm going to be doing green beans along the side here. If you were doing squash, any kind of melon really, you might want to do more. Whereas if you're doing like vining flowers, you might want to do less. It really just depends on what you're growing. So make sure to do a little research to see what works best for you. And like I said, the nice thing about the PVC is you can cut it down, you can add to it, you can, you know, store it for a season. It's really versatile and it's very inexpensive. I mean, these little pieces right here were 57 cents. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. And as much as I'd like a nice fancy, you know, cedar wood one that looks perfect, I much prefer, you know, how versatile this is versus something that just looks nicer. All right, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to be cutting down this wire. Unfortunately, they were out of the 3-foot. These beds are 31 inches across. So I'm gonna have to do some extra cutting here. It's really up to you. For me, how cheap this was and it was easily available, it's worth a little extra time cutting. For you, it might be worth it to find something that is the right size and you just have to cut the length. So I'm gonna cut that down and then we'll zip tie it together and it'll be good to go. Zip ties. So I cut this to be 15 feet long. And this is probably the hardest part of doing this all. So just getting it in place so you can secure it. And you're gonna have your wire curling. I stepped on it a couple times to straighten it out a little bit, but once it's secured, it's not gonna be a problem. So now all you do is you take a couple zip ties and you secure it to the pipe. So here's a close-up view of the trellis. So as you can see, it's not the prettiest, but it's well secured here. It's sturdy. I don't know if you can see me shaking it, but it's gonna take a decent storm to really cause us any damage. There's plenty of room to plant my green beans. And even though I had to double up because my wire wasn't enough, I think the spaces will be fine for what I'm growing. And that is it. That is how you build this 6-foot long, 5-foot tall trellis to help get a little more square footage out of your garden every year. And like I said, you could build this out of any material. Wood, this PVC pipe. I would probably stay away from metal pipes because of the heat. It might burn your plants if you live in an area like this. Like right now it's a little over 100 degrees. But this whole project costs about $25 and I'll be able to reuse it year after year after year. So totally worth it. And as you can see, one of my dogs is enjoying the new setup. So I'll be keeping you updated throughout the season on how this is working and adjustments I would make in the future. And if you have any comments or questions, just click the link in this post and let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks everybody.